Eagles Entertainment.
With the 10th pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select...
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, presented by Life Brand. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and we're getting you ready for the College Football National Championship. We're going wall to wall, soup to nuts, A to Z, everything in between for today's show. We've got 4 guests, and the first 3 are going to be hitting on this national title game between Alabama and Georgia. We're going to start things off with Saturday Scouting, where Ben Fennell is going to jump on the show, and we're going to start things off with this game, Alabama, Georgia, and we're going to talk about it from the structure of the last time these two teams met in the SEC title game. But Ben and I both have watched that game on film on both sides, and we've got takeaways from what the film showed in that game just a month ago, and then we're going to spin that forward to what that means for Monday night. After that, I'm joined for Mr. Relevant this week by Thor Nystrom, who's here to preview that national title game once again. And Thor does a great job covering all things college football and the NFL draft for NBC Sports Edge. Love having him on the show whenever we can, and he's here to get us ready for this big rematch. Then we round out the national title discussion with Pick 6, where Ross Tucker and I, we put the cherry on top of our weekly competition this year on the show with some friendly picks in the conclusion there of our Pick 6 segment. We'll do all that there towards the end of the show. And then, as always, love having Eric Galko on from the Shrine Bowl. We're going to talk about a player that is not going to be participating here in this game on Monday night, but one of the more productive pass rushers in the country in this senior class. We'll talk through that with Eric at the back end of the show. As always, make sure you head on over to our Apple Podcast page. Leave us a rating. Leave us a comment. If you've got a question about the NFL draft or about any mock draft you've got, player rankings, whatever it is, jump on over to our Apple Podcast page. Leave the question there in the comment section, and we will hit on it here in an upcoming show. That said, let's get going. We've got a lot to talk about here in this episode. We're going to start things off at the top with Saturday Scouting.
It's time for Saturday Scouting.
All right, well, let's start things off here with Saturday Scouting as I welcome in Ben Fennell. And Ben, you and I, we were kind of going back and forth on ways to talk about this matchup. And I thought you came up with a great idea. Hey, why don't we go back and rewatch the SEC title game and each of us kind of present some takeaways. And so with that in mind, I'll let you go first. You were responsible for Alabama's defense against Georgia's offense and 3 big takeaways from that side of the ball.
Yeah, it was really fun exercise to kind of go back and just recalibrate before the national championship game on Monday night, just to see what the takeaways are, what maybe the coaches are doing to self-scout and make adjustments heading into this next rematch. Because, you know, the focal point of both staffs are going to be finding out what went well and what didn't, and what needs to change and what needs to stay the same from that previous matchup. Obviously, one team came out on top. The other team is going back to the lab and figuring out how to change the course. But I wonder, looking back and Nick Saban watching that tape, if he was happy with his defensive performance. While it ended up being a double-digit win and obviously some nice plays on the defensive side with some game-changing interceptions, particularly in that second half. I felt like the pick 6 from Jordan Battle really kind of sealed the game.
Yep.
But it was really a bend but don't break kind of defense from Alabama, which really isn't their style. You know, early on, they had an 11-play drive in the first quarter, resulted in a field goal, big third down stop in the red zone. There was a 12-play drive later on, ended in the red zone on 4th down. Is Nick Saban okay with those long drives and buckling down in the red zone? Or would he want more critical stops, obviously early on and 3rd down and things like that? Georgia moved the ball on this team. It was just those critical plays, the occasional 3rd down in the red zone, the big 4th down plays. Those plays are going to be hyper-focused this week in how to kind of get these teams out of their rhythm on 3rd down and what they like to do. I think Alabama wants to send the heavy pressure at Stetson Bennett. They got to have better blitz beaters this week. And I felt like some of those all-out pressures against Bennett, he kind of struggled with. But then again, Fran, he had 2 touchdowns against the blitz that week. He was 12 of 16 for 130 against Michigan's blitz. He had enough plays and enough success to kind of lean on, but it was just a few of those critical down plays, the 3rd down, the red zone, the 4th down, where he just didn't have an answer for. It was really fun watching Georgia's offense, and I thought they did a really good job of mixing their attack points, whether it's downhill runs and then all the quick perimeter actions, whether it's the jet sweeps, the quick screens to the outsides, releasing the offensive linemen, the jailbreak screens. I think getting the ball out of Stetson Bennett's hands, not only in the run game, but the quick game passing is really important, especially when Bama and those backers want to get downhill. having those occasional change-up plays to the outside, which I thought they hit a few of really impressively, whether it was McConkey on the big play, whether it was Brock Bowers on his touchdown late in the game. I thought the blitz beaters in combination with just the cat and mouse of the blitz this week, Fran, I think is going to be really, really important. One of my last takeaways, just kind of go through the gauntlet here. Brock Bowers, true freshman, had 10 for 139 and a touchdown against Bama in a variety of ways. Some were schemed open, like the screen I had mentioned. Some were incredible plays on the ball, like that seam down the middle of Tampa 2, where he just made an incredible catch. So I think obviously he's going to be a focal point in stopping this week. And I think they need to change up some of their defensive approaches in stopping Brock Bowers.
So a lot to unpack there. I guess to your first point about Alabama's philosophy in that game, what it forces Georgia to do. Like, look, it makes Georgia and Stetson Bennett have to be efficient, right? But then when you get to the 3rd and 7s, the 4th and 5 scenarios, if you're going to go for it in plus territory, right? As you mentioned, those areas those are going to be hyper focused plays, and they could determine the outcome of this game, right? So you're going to need some of those role players when your number is called for Georgia. You mentioned some of those plays that those quick hitters to the perimeter. I even think of like some of those early plays that they ran to James Cook early in that game, right, where they were able to get him out in space, outside the alley, and find some open grass. You need to be able to capitalize on more of those plays than you did the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think finding just some of those quick hitting concepts to get the ball out of his hands, to take some of the pressure off of the interior and the box, and allowing some of those weapons on the outside to get some chunk yardages. But it's the cat and mouse of it all. Can you catch Bama in that blitz while you throw that receiver screen? That's how you end up with 60-yard touchdowns, like they had the McConkey. It was a 55-yard touchdown out there. But hey, if we're trying to hit the seam over the middle into an all-out blitz, just so happened that call didn't work against that pressure, and the 4th down play didn't work out. So a lot of big plays there, and even I thought Georgia's offense played really well, Fran. And even early on, when they got pinned deep in the first quarter, beautiful punt by Alabama, kind of playing field position. They were backed up on their own end. They got out. Yep. And they ended up having a really nice drive. And, they hit that kind of fake perimeter action, tight end screen. You really saw the play sequencing of it all, where we're running hard up the middle, then the jet sweep. Then we fake the jet sweep and hit the tight end pop pass over the middle of the play. You just kind of felt the sequencing of it all, of how they wanted to attack Alabama. George Pickens, big play down the left-hand sideline later in that drive, where he just beasted and made some big catches. I think the one-on-one plays that Stetson Bennett wants to take and give his guys some opportunities. We saw big catches by George Pickens. Also saw some pass interference plays. I think getting that ball out is going to yield more positive results for Georgia than sitting on it and waiting for guys to get open. Give guys chances. These guys can make plays one-on-one. You can get some pass interferences. Don't be afraid to cut that thing loose, Stetson Bennett. I think holding the ball will do you more harm than good.
And one of the things that I noticed just from watching that side, you talked about the play sequencing and, constantly kind of keeping the defense on their toes. I thought it was a really good way to try and negate that rush, and Will Anderson too, right? If you are constantly throwing some of the jet sweeps and the jet action and those quick hitting perimeter plays, and then that kind of loosens them up to now we can go between the tackles if we need to. Hey, now we can go straight drop back or a play action pass and take our shots.
It was kind of funny on the pick 6 in the second half by Jordan Battle. It was a really kind of interesting cover 6, quarter half play there where he kind of jumped the seam by number 2. Well, number 3 was Brock Bowers. You know who was covering him? Will Anderson. It was kind of interesting to see the different roles they have Will Anderson do, despite being this quarterback killer, TFL in every backfield. He has to, do some unique roles as well on some of those zone pressures and maybe overloading the other side of him. Not to mention Will Anderson. Everyone knows who Will Anderson is. Typically, you're sliding protection his way. Typically, you're sending some chippers his way. You're obviously the focal point of pass protecting Will Anderson. Will Anderson doesn't always have to rush to get that impact. The second you dedicate pass protection resources to him and he drops out, suddenly there's a weakness on the other side. So I think the cat and mouse of how you use Will Anderson and the fact that he doesn't have to rush every play to be effective, I think will be fun to watch too.
All right. So if you're good, we'll, because we're still going to talk about this game in general, I'm going to switch over to my takeaways on the other side. And to me, watching Alabama's offense against Georgia's defense, My number one takeaway was the play of quarterback Bryce Young in this game. His poise stood out above everything else, and it showed up in so many different ways against the blitz because Georgia sent everybody at him, especially early on in this game. Lots of Nakobe Dean, lots of Quay Walker. You saw safeties coming from the third level, right? So I thought he executed against the blitz. He took a lot of hits from some of those defensive linemen as well. Walker's in the backfield. Some of these other guys in the interior in the backfield, right? So always under pressure. He was dealt with a lot of pressure in that game. But even on some of the plays, Ben, that were busted plays, broken plays, he had that little flip out on the scramble drill, right, where he's about to get tackled and he flips it to the right sideline. He makes a throw falling down on 3rd and 2, just always calm, always collected. And to me, that was a big part of why they were able to win this game is Bryce Young's poise throughout the course of the football game. The second part of it, and I think this is going to be a big part of it as well, we know about Georgia's defense. We know about their run defense, right? It's one of the best, if not the best, in college football this year. And that's going to put a reliance on Bryce Young and this passing game. And when you look at the way that they've played over the last couple of games in particular, number one, it was in this game, in the SEC title game against Georgia. But even if you go to the college football semifinal against Cincinnati, what was something that was a killer against this talented Bearcats defense? Those bunch sets, right? It was so big for them against Cincinnati. Well, if you go back against Georgia, a lot of their big plays and most important plays came from the bunch. That 67-yard touchdown for Jamison Williams, that was against the split safety kind of zone match scheme. Georgia had 2 DBs in the middle of the field. Well, Alabama ran like a 3-receiver, like a little follow concept. No one goes with Jamison Williams. Those 2 DBs, they break on those first 2 inbreakers. Nobody goes with Jamison Williams on the third one, the most vertical of those 3. He's wide open in the middle of the field, and he goes 67 yards to the house. They ran that same exact play later in the game on a very key third down play. It was like 3rd and 5, and they hit Slade Bolden in the middle of the field for 24 yards, right? So those bunch sets, like, look, against Cincinnati, they were killer against some of their man concepts. Against Georgia, with some of that zone match, you're going to get some of those same principles. And I think that Alabama was able to get some big plays. And then you could throw in another one as well, a 22-yard catch by Jaleel Billingsley on 3rd and 2. Same kind of, this was late in the second quarter, still a very tight game at this point. It was essentially a bunch set. It was a 3-man route concept to the boundary. So a lot of bodies in a tight area. And again, nobody went with Billingsley. So I think that Alabama's ability to capitalize when those opportunities are there, where, you know, if it's a busted coverage or just where the route concept is able to win, those guys are able to come up with some of those big plays. And by the way, this would be the third takeaway for me. They have to do this without John Mechie, right? And Mechie, so savvy, so reliable. I don't think that he's as explosive as, certainly not as Jamison Williams, but even if you go back to, like Devontae Smith, he's not that kind of juicy receiver vertically, but I think he's just so savvy, so reliable. And Bryce Young obviously has a lot of faith in him. There was that touchdown, remember, in the red zone where middle of the play, Bryce Young is pointing at John Mechie, break off your route, run to the pylon, and he tosses it in the right corner of the end zone. So you just have that faith in one of your starting receivers. That is not there. So who's going to be there to kind of step up in their stead? It's going to be Slade Bolden on 3rd down. Will we see the young guy, Tracian Holden? This past week against Cincinnati, it was Ja'Cory Brooks who went 4 for 66 and a touchdown against the Cincinnati Bearcats. So to me, who's going to pick up for John Mechie? And kind of what we were talking about earlier with Alabama's defense against Georgia, you need some of those younger guys, those unproven guys, to be able to come through and make some big plays when the opportunity is there.
And what I was really impressed with as far as Bryce Young on the Alabama side, his poise and his game management.
Yeah, no doubt.
Because this game did not always go Alabama's way throughout. And I think we forget that, considering how the second half went, considering how the score looked and the box score. I mean, Georgia was up 10-0 to start this game after the first quarter. Alabama didn't have a great first 2 drives, really didn't go anywhere. But punts are okay. You can play field position. You can trust the defense. Making reckless throws on 3rd down, or maybe, getting a sack fumble or a turnover, is critical in these games. And I thought Bryce Young did a great job of not putting the ball in harm's way, saying, you know what, punts are okay. We can play the field position game. And when the time is right, I'm going to step up and make some plays and forget about those previous drives. And I thought the sequence when Georgia hit the 3-play, 75 yards, hit the touchdown to McConkey there at the late second quarter. And then Bryce Young came and executed a beautiful 2-minute drill. 9 plays, 75 yards, got the touchdown right before the half, where Georgia got the ball back for just a couple seconds, sat on it, went to half. Then Young came right back out in the second half, touchdown drive. almost stole 14 points right there, and a huge swing, in my opinion. That 2-minute drill was outstanding, considering it wasn't always pretty with that Alabama offense, run game, pass game, everything. But his poise, not putting the ball in harm's way, having that kind of short-term memory, and knowing, hey, every drive is another opportunity for me to get it right. And I think just playing, I don't want to call it conservative. I don't want to say game managing in a negative connotation, but I thought his poise throughout the game was just very, very mature.
And it carries through, like when you hear him do interviews, like even just like right off the field post game, right? I remember in that SEC title game, he comes off the field and he's doing an interview with the sideline reporter, and he's just, honestly, it's very similar to Jalen Hurts, where it's just like flatline in a good way, right? Just very steady Eddie. And I feel like that is the way that he plays. Just some of those plays, you're like, man, like for a sophomore quarterback to be making this kind of play and this kind of situation is just so big time. And I feel like that's been a staple of Alabama quarterbacks now for a few years.
Yeah, real quick, after that touchdown drive right out the gate in the second half, then they had a 4-play drive punt, a 5-play drive punt, 3-play drive punt. It wasn't even great on the offensive side for the rest of the game. I think that pick 6 in there really, turned the tides, obviously, gave them that extra touchdown and gave them a 19-point lead. It was pretty much all she wrote. You're up 19, going against Bama in the second half. You're all intents and purposes, you're pretty much done once you're in pass mode there. Yep. But, also for, Stetson Bennett that second half, coming back after turnovers and not kind of quitting, he throws a pick 6. Like I mentioned to Jordan Battle, that next drive, that's when he ripped that throw to Brock Bowers down the middle. I don't know if he was just in effort mode at that point, but he came back slinging, and I respect that, and I love that these kids aren't going to back down.
It's going to be a really, really interesting game from that standpoint. So now that we've kind of gone through our takeaways from this SEC title game, let's just spin this forward to Monday night. Just kind of go like almost prospect by prospect. We don't need to go super deep on every single guy, but just guys that we haven't really talked about yet in this conversation. I guess we'll start on the Alabama side. Alabama's offense, when they've got the ball going up against Georgia's defense. We talked plenty about Bryce Young, but let's talk about the guy that's sharing that backfield with him, and that's Brian Robinson, who was a big part of the win over Cincinnati. The pass game was a little disjointed, and that gets me back to what my takeaway about no John Mechie, right? You talk late in that game, in the Georgia game, the offense kind of teetered off. You talked about how Georgia was able to kind of put the brakes on. That coincided pretty well with John Mechie's departure in that game with the torn ACL. And so we'll see if Brian Robinson is able to get going. Dude, he's so much fun to watch. Just a really powerful physical back, no nonsense. He's a super senior that went back for the extra year after backing up Najee Harris the last couple of years. Brian Robinson is no joke. And this is a guy that absolutely can be the focal point of this offense. He's just going up against a really tough Georgia front.
Well, Fran, when you had the 4 playoff teams and you're looking at Jerome Ford and Brian Robinson and Zamir White and Hassan Haskins, I think trend of those 4, those are some big boys out there that have no problem closing their eyes, lowering their pads, playing behind the pads, and just trying to go right through people's faces, a la Marshawn Lynch style. These guys are big, they're physical, they run between the tackles, and they really set the tone up front. And they make defenses allocate extra resources to stop the run and get that extra safety down. Then it suddenly lightens up the perimeter, lightens up the back end, and you capitalize off the run. But I love watching Brian Robinson run. It reminds me a little bit of our own Jordan Howard, kind of a no-nonsense downhill guy, loves running between the tackles, loves finishing defenders. And when you look at some of the best backs in this NFL this year, it's a lot of big boys with Jonathan Taylor and Derrick Henry and Joe Mixon and guys like that.
Yeah, right, sure.
Yeah, the NFL wants some guys with body armor to survive. I think there's places for James Cooks of the world, but these big backs like Brian Robinson, they're good players. They're going to play on Sunday. They just maybe don't have that home run juice and ending up on a ton of highlights in the open field.
So the reason why this Georgia front is so good, I mean, they are literally like loaded with guys along the defensive line just for this class, right? Like Devontae Wyatt, obviously Jordan Davis in the middle, number 99 in the middle. Trayvon Walker lines up inside and outside. Let's just talk through those defensive linemen before we get to the second level at linebacker. Who stands out most? I mean, really all 3 have their different ways that they are able to win up front.
Yeah, Trayvon Walker, I think, is a really interesting dirty work guy because his positional versatility gives them so much flexibility, not only just for aligning a really stud player up and down the line, but to really take advantage of some matchups. Because if you think you can line up a tight end over him, no. That play is going to be destroyed.
That one play that Cincinnati tried to run the split zone and him just smashing the tight end of the backfield, that went viral over the weekend.
Oh, it was brutal. And a play, I think last week, Michigan tried to pull an offensive lineman. He crushed him from the other side as well. He's a brute strong guy, loves playing across the line of scrimmage. And that Georgia front seven starts with the front.
Yep.
That's what allows those backers to roam and plug and obviously fill their gaps there. But rarely ever does that defensive line get knocked back. Do they ever lose their kind of own gap integrity on the first line? And Jordan Davis and big Devontae Wyatt, who I don't think gets nearly enough credit there. I think he's really the dancing panda of the group there. Big 95, can play up and down the line too. He gets upfield better than everybody else too. But they're really stout up front, technically sound and fun to watch.
And then they've got the kid Redmond, who was a true sophomore, right? 88 inside. That we're not talking about now, but for next year's draft for 2023,
big Jalen Carter,
Carter. That's right. Sorry, Redmond. Yeah, Jalen Carter. He is he might be the most twitchy and like disruptive of that group. I think these other guys kind of win more with like strength, power, ferocity. This kid Carter, he's got a lot of juice inside.
Yeah, Jalen Carter, Will Anderson, look for them on Monday night, but they're going to be, unfortunately, on our 2023 boards as they're both true sophomores and not draft eligible.
And then just looking at these linebackers as well, it's a trio there. They're usually only two of them on the field at a time, but you look at Nakobe Dean, Channing Tindall, Quay Walker. Tindall and Walker both going to the Senior Bowl. Nakobe Dean, he won all the awards this past year. He's the Defensive Player of the Year essentially for college football. He's a true junior, hasn't declared for the draft yet. But with all three of these guys, it's interesting because they all bring something to the table. Quay Walker is like 6'4", 245, just a rare physical specimen because not only is he that big, but this kid's got plenty of juice. He is really good in reverse, and he's a really versatile coverage piece for them. So I would expect that you're going to see some reps with him going up against Jaleel Billingsley and some of these other big players in the interior for Alabama. He's not just a downhill guy. He'll play in reverse, and has been a really versatile coverage piece for them in space.
Yeah, and what was your assessment of how Michigan tried to play them last week? Because I thought right out the gate was a very clear intent by Jim Harbaugh on that offense to have fast flow beaters.
Yeah.
And did you take note? They ran a flea flicker on the first play of the game.
Yeah, I think I'm sure obviously that was done with a purpose, but yeah, they were. No
question. You better have some fast flow beaters because these guys are see ball, get ball.
Sharks in the water.
In a snap. So you better toy with their quick triggering, toy with their fast flow ability, and have some misdirection. Now, Michigan's didn't always execute as designed, but their intent was these linebackers fly. They fly quick. We need to kind of toy with their eyes and toy with their misdirection.
And all three of these guys, when you talk about Dean, Tindall, and Walker, all very active in their pressure schemes. All of them are used as blitzers inside, outside. Tindall is super, super explosive. Quay Walker, I already talked about his athleticism. Dean is just like a ball of razor blades. I've made the comparison in the past to Demario Davis with the Saints. Like, he's not like super, super impressive, like from a physical standpoint. He's got range and top end speed, but I do think it takes him a little bit of time. I don't know if the giddy up is quite there in the first like 2-3 steps, but he's got that ability to play sideline to sideline. It's a really impressive group of linebackers. When you talk about that front seven, there's a reason why they've been extremely difficult to run against all year long.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think how they kind of pursue the quarterback is going to be interesting to see. Do you want to blitz and over pursue? Do you kind of sit back with the quarterback spy, hope to flush them out into the hands of somebody? I think keeping Bryce Love in the pocket this week is going to be a very, very high point of emphasis. So if you see that Georgia rush maybe looking a little sluggish, maybe with some intent as well, trying to mush rush, keep Bryce Young in the pocket, who is only about 6'1", 6'2". You kind of want him having to throw in the trees there, especially when you got 6'6" guys like Jordan Davis in front of you, things like that, and Trayvon Walker. So I want to see kind of how Kirby Smart wants to approach defensively and say, hey, are we going to blitz and send these dogs? Or do we want them to kind of sit back and clean up the scraps when Bryce Young wants to break the pocket?
And we haven't talked about probably the most dynamic, explosive player on the field in this game, regardless of sideline. Jameson Williams, a wide receiver, has just been remarkable. The transfer from Ohio State won a bunch of awards so far this year. Has been an All-American wide receiver and return man for the Alabama Crimson Tide. With no John Mechie, Williams is obviously going to be the focal point of this passing game. And going back and watching the film, we saw the 67-yarder, as I talked about. That was an intermediate area, and he's caught a bunch of those this year, whether it's been off an RPO or play action, middle of the field, slants, in breakers, glances, just get him the ball on the run and let him run away from everybody. I thought in that game last month, you saw plenty of fades and designed deep balls. He caught a touchdown as well on a designed deep shot, and they were only able to hit on the one to Williams, but I think they tried like 4 or 5. So we'll see if you can capitalize on 2 or 3 of those in this game. Obviously, that goes a long way towards changing the outcome as well.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember, Alabama's win over Georgia last month, that was mostly through the air. I mean, Bryce Young thrown for over 400 yards, 3 touchdowns. It was kind of a different Alabama style, as they're typically a ground and pound first and foremost, and then you capitalize off RPO and play action. It's really kind of taking a different tone and style this year. So you start to take away some parts like John Mechie. Do they have enough playmakers outside of Jameson Williams and Jaleel Billingsley? I think that's going to be the big kind of question this week out there. Do they have enough of a playmaking scat back behind Brian Robinson to give some matchup nightmares? That's kind of why Alabama looked so, for lack of better words, kind of pedestrian against Cincinnati. This is a team that doesn't really have the full arsenal of ways to attack you this year. But they can win, and they're technically sound, and they're well coached, and that's why they're sitting here at 12-1 in a national championship game.
The guy that will be seeing a lot of Jameson Williams, DK Kendrick, the senior corner for Georgia. He transferred in from Clemson this past year. Really talented player. Started his career as a 4-star recruit as a wide receiver at Clemson. Kendrick had 2 picks last week. So just keep an eye on DK Kendrick. He had a couple picks there.
Like real quick, Fran, just like before we turn this over to the Georgia side, just looking at the receiving numbers of that previous game. I mean, Alabama's got a handful of guys with reception. Georgia has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 different players that have receptions last game. And to look at all the different shapes and sizes and scat backs and big backs and slot receivers and big tight ends and small tight ends and just all sorts of different weapons. I think Georgia's offense has exponentially more weapons and tools and playmakers than this Alabama unit.
Well, and that's the thing is that you're going to need, if you're Alabama, you need this, think of, when Alabama beat Georgia last time, right? Tua comes in in overtime and wins the game, and he throws the deep ball to the freshman wide receiver that no one really talked about at that point. That guy's Devontae Smith, right? And so you need that kind of breakout performance if you're Alabama, likely in this game. I don't think this is going to be like that Alabama LSU rematch, the national title. It was like 6-3, right? I don't think it's going to be one of those games. You're going to need to score a couple of touchdowns, and unless Jameson Williams just goes nuclear, you're going to need somebody, maybe it's Billingsley, right. Maybe it's Brooks, if it's Holden, whoever it is, you're going to need one of those guys to really break out here in this one.
Yeah, that's what my buddy was saying. He's like, do you know who Ja'Cory Brooks is? Not yet, because you will, just like Devontae Smith. This is a 6'2", 190 kid from Miami. That's a true freshman. He's just dying to get on the field and show everybody he's just as capable as the rest of them.
Exactly right. Well, let's get over to that other side of the ball. So now Georgia's got the ball. Alabama's defense on the field. You've talked plenty about Stetson Bennett and the way that he's going to have to perform in this game. Let's talk a little bit about these Georgia running backs matched up against these Alabama linebackers. Because, like we talked about that Georgia linebacking crew. Alabama's got a duo that's not too shabby themselves with Christian Harris and Henry To'oTo'o.
Yeah, and I thought the game last week was really interesting in that a lot of those Georgia offensive linemen went right up to the second level and felt like we had to block these linebackers as opposed to moving the guys on the front line. Not a whole lot of double teams on Byron Young and DJ Dale and big Fedarian Mathis out there. So if those guys want to release up and say, hey, we have to block Harris and To'oTo'o, those guys on the front line need to stack and shed and get off more blocks this week, in my opinion. But it was a really fun kind of chess match just to watch and see when Slayer and Schaefer were kind of just quick releasing up to that second level. And then when they had a lot of those perimeter actions too. That's a pretty athletic offensive line from Georgia.
Yep.
I think they kind of looked the part of being like these Baltimore Ravens power run team. We're only going to go vertical, but these guys can play out in space. And I think they showed that in that last Alabama game with some of those jailbreak concepts. But I think Cook and White are a really interesting combo of styles as well.
Yeah, but definitely kind of a thunder and lightning duo there with White, who's a more physical, between the tackles type back. Cook, definitely more of that perimeter action type of player. And whether it's as a pass catcher or as a runner, they'll try and get him the ball in space. They did early. That was a focal point for Georgia early in that game last month. They wanted to get Cook the ball, whether it was pass game or run, those quick little toss plays, try and get him out in the perimeter. But I'll tell you what, Justin Schaefer, left guard, Jamari Salyer, left tackle, right? Those guys, they are stone cold killers up front. Like they want to embarrass you, especially when they get up on linebackers. If there's two guys that are up for that challenge, Christian Harris and Henry Toyo, they don't back down from anybody. Those guys are physical, violent, competitive linebackers, but both guys really athletic too. You're just watching Christian Harris. They tried to do one of those little perimeter plays to James Cook early in that game. It was opening drive the last time these two teams met. And Harris just sprints from the backside and meets Cook right at the line of scrimmage. These guys are really, really talented for when you talk about Harris and Toyo.
Yeah, they're really impressive linebackers. I wouldn't be surprised to see them go 2 and 3 behind Devin Lloyd this draft. They're that talented. And some teams may even prefer them, but their ability to run sideline to sideline with their physical temperament and kind of tone-setting attitude, 3-down players, whether you want them to blitz or turn and run down the seam, they can really do everything you need as a Mike Will pair.
Yeah, and you shared your thoughts on Fedarian Mathis, the Alabama defensive lineman, in the last episode, just coming off that game against Cincinnati. But interesting, kind of get if you could just talk about it from the framework of this episode, obviously this episode against Georgia in this matchup. How do you feel about Mathis, DJ Dale inside at nose tackle as well, with obviously Will Anderson off the edge, that Alabama defensive line going up against Georgia?
Yeah, really stout group, but those Alabama trench players are typically kind of boring. They don't get the green light to shoot across the line of scrimmage and play in one gap schemes and get a lot of TFLs. You have to play run to pass. Typically you're square setting, kind of locking out, 2 gapping. You can play the peekaboo game, but that's your job on early downs. And Fedarian Mathis, DJ Dale, that's pretty much Dalvin Tomlinson, Jerron Reed, A'Shaun Robinson type. This really isn't the Christian Barmore or Jonathan Allen type. Definitely line of scrimmage dwellers, brute strong. And occasionally, if they're on the field on 3rd down, these guys can make an impact, whether they're just walking into your offensive lineman back into the quarterback's lap, or maybe getting on a half man and just ragdolling an offensive lineman. These guys are strong, and their pass rush ability is just scratching the surface based on what they're asked to do. A lot like the way Deron Payne was all over Jake Fromm in that national championship game a few years ago. And everybody said, whoa, Deron Payne can rush the passer? You don't know they can do it until they're greenlit and they can do it. So Fedarian Mathis, I think the world over right now, and I have very, very high expectations for him, not only on Monday night, but at the Senior Bowl, the Combine, and then eventually in the pros.
We talked a little bit about Brock Bowers, the freshman tight end from Georgia, who was an All-American, not a freshman All-American, an All-American this year for Georgia, one of the best tight ends in the country. And what's unique about him is it's not often that you see tight ends catching jet sweeps. And not only has Bowers taken a couple jet sweeps, he's taken at least 1, I think 2, to the house this year. So this is a guy that's got that kind of hybrid potential, also gives plenty of effort as a blocker. He's got great hands. So the matchup there, Bowers, he's going to see some Jordan Battle in this game. I think that's going to be a really fun matchup to watch.
I'm taking him away, Fran. He's probably public enemy number 1 on the whiteboard of the defensive room. Now we're going to throw a variety of coverages at him. We're going to bracket him on 3rd down, and we're going to make sure we almost always have safeties and corners on him, not linebackers. To see him go 10 for 139 and a touchdown in a variety of ways, that cannot happen. And I think the intent of game planning defensively is how do we take away what they want to do? We need to take something away. We need to tie one of their hands behind their back. I'm looking at Brock Bowers and then James Cook. We cannot let these two beat us in the pass game. If Darnell Washington wants to catch seam balls over Toyo like he did in the first quarter last game, we'll take that risk. If George Pickens wants to 50-50 a ball down the field 50 yards, we'll take that risk. Most of the time, we're going to trust Toyo to make that play. We're going to trust our big corner to make that play out there. We can't let this move tight end and the scat back James Cook beat us with their versatility.
Yeah, George Pickens was a guy that a lot of people were really, really high on coming into the year. He actually
I didn't realize how big he was.
Yeah, he's a big boy. I mean, he was getting comparisons when he was a true freshman to AJ Green when he first got there, just because he caught everything. He's just long and rangy. Like,
did you see some of the blocks going around social media?
Yeah, I did.
In that Michigan game, I guess shushing the crowd, then putting the corner on his butt, and then shushing the crowd again right after that.
Right back to him.
Yeah, he's had more than a few physical highlight plays on tape, whether legal or not legal, like the fight he had against Georgia Tech last year. But he seems like a guy that does not back down. I didn't know he was 6'3" and change. I thought he was more in the 6'2" kind of range, 195. But no, he is filled out. He's tall, he's thick, and he wakes up angry. I don't know who gave him some spoiled milk in the cereal, but he seems like a guy that's just really angry out there, which I love watching.
I remember talking with Lawrence Cager at the Combine in 2020. So this was after his freshman year.
He was on transfer from Miami to Georgia, right?
Exactly. So they both got there at the same time. Cager came in as a transfer. Pickens came in as a true freshman. He was a big boy too. Yeah, and he said, like, unbelievable. Everything we saw from him as a freshman, and Pickens was an outstanding player as a freshman. He was the number one receiver for them when he first got on campus. Every single day in practice, he pulled balls off people's heads. Like, he was just ridiculous every single day. But as you mentioned, he got into a fight in the Georgia Tech game after the SEC. That was the 2019 season, actually, when he got kicked out of and ended up missing the first half of the SEC title game that year. He had some, I think there was a play where he squirted Jared Guarantano, the Tennessee quarterback, with a water bottle. Right. Remember that one? He's had some moments on the sideline.
The physicality thing can go bad in an instant, and it can also be a point of endearment. I mean, I remember Urban Meyer saying to Mike Mayock off camera in the draft, man, Mike Thomas is one of the most competitive SOBs I've ever been around. This guy fights daily in practice. And it wasn't man, we can't trust him. It was talking about his competitiveness. And it wasn't that he was a bad kid. He just was very feisty and competitive. So George Pickens, buyer beware. He's kind of towing that line right now. Some coaches may view it as endearing, competitive. Some may view it as kind of reckless. So it's on Pickens to kind of calibrate that for the future employment.
Well, definitely a name to keep an eye out for. A bunch of names that we've covered here so far in this segment. We're going to continue doing that here as we're going to catch up with Thor Nystrom from NBC Sports Edge. It's time for Mr. Relevant.
Hey, Eagles fans, get ready for the game each Sunday with an exclusive look at Eagles pregame warmups brought to you live each week when you join myself, Amy Campbell, and Eagles insider Dave Spadaro on the Kickoff Show presented by Exalta. We provide Eagles-focused analysis, late-breaking news, and the team perspective that you cannot get anywhere else. The Kickoff Show presented by Exalta can be seen live 50 minutes before kickoff on PhiladelphiaEagles.com, the Eagles mobile app, and the team's social media channels.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
Well, excited to welcome back to the show for Mr. Relevant, one Thor Nystrom, who does a great job breaking down college football and draft prospects once we get to the spring for NBC Sports Edge. You can follow him on Twitter at ThorKU. Thor, welcome back to the show, man.
Hey, thanks a lot, Fran. Thanks for having me.
All right, well, let's get into this national title game because I wanted to bring you on just to kind of talk through, obviously, a lot of prospects on the field. These are two teams that have been in the spotlight all season long, Alabama and Georgia. And so I'll ask you this one question off the top. In your mind, who is the best draft prospect, not overall, because obviously there are a lot of guys for 2023 and beyond, but for this spring, for 2022, who is the guy that you're most intrigued by on either side of the ball?
Okay, so if it's for this spring, then we're disqualifying Bryce Young as an answer. So in that case, I'm going to be taking Evan Neal. Evan Neal, I mean, he's a guy that we've known about him for a while. Obviously, he was a high recruit and everything like that, and he's just gotten better and better and better. I mean, his progression is he even started further than Jedrick Wills, but he's at this point, you're seeing an elite player. And the rest of the Alabama offensive line, the four guys to his right, struggled this season. Not as much for Neal. He's one of the reasons that Alabama, their offensive line hasn't created. I think he's a stud prospect. It was sort of like Tyler Linderbaum with Iowa, where the guys around him were struggling this year. But you saw that, Linderbaum, so clearly was holding that line together and such a superior player. It's very similar with Neal on Alabama. It's just that he's, the left tackle.
Yeah, Neil, an outstanding player who has played 3 positions in 3 years for the Crimson Tide, and that versatility will serve him well. He's athletic, he's big, he's strong, he's powerful. And like I said, that versatility is a huge feather in his cap. Outside of Evan Neal, we'll kind of look at this game and just kind of take a step back and look big picture. Who's a player that you feel has the biggest, and this could be from anybody, regardless of draft class, to change the outcome of this game, that can swing it either way with how they perform on Monday night?
I think a really important player is Alabama strong safety Jordan Battle. Alabama's top 2 cornerbacks are both injured, Josh Jobe and Jalen Armour-Davis. And Alabama's run defense is their strength. So you would figure that Georgia would try to throw it a bit more here. And who they're going to, it figures that they're going to throw it to is the 2 tight ends, because Georgia has the best tight end combination in America with Bowers and Washington. So Battle is going to be instrumental in, in terms of in coverage against both those guys. But also, when Georgia's running the ball, Battle's a guy that can come up into the box. He's a physical player. So he's also going to be, and he can blitz too. But if it's me, I would rather have him in coverage, trying to defend one of those tight ends. And then again, the run defense, the things he can add there. Alabama cannot allow those 2 Georgia tight ends to go off because Georgia doesn't have as many playmakers as Alabama in the wide receiver core. And Alabama did do well against the Georgia run offense before. So I think that's a huge key to this game.
Yeah, what I love about Jordan Battle, I mean, he's a junior and he's got a career as a core special teamer early on, but now that he's become a starter, watching him, he is so, this can be an umbrella term, but he is so instinctive. I think he has route recognition skills, whether he's in man against the tight end, which, as you mentioned, we'll see him matched up at times, especially against Brock Bowers in this one, but even as a high player playing from depth, as a 2 high player, just a really good coverage piece. The production hasn't always been there, but I know PFF came out, he was the highest graded safety this year for them, and I think one of the highest safety grades they've given out in the last several years. So, and watch, I think the film backs that up. Battle's a really, really good player, and I'm glad you wanted to shine a spotlight on him. Overall, is there a player that you feel has the most pressure in this game? Obviously, a game that was very tilted the last time these 2 teams met in the SEC title game. Still, Georgia favored here going into this game. So who do you think has the most pressure on them on Monday night?
I'm going to go with a couple on each side. So on the Georgia side, of course, Stetson Bennett just jumps out because Stetson Bennett cannot play poorly in this game. And if he does, they're probably going to yank him for Daniels if they end up going behind and doing sort of a reverse Bama, with Tua and Hurts and stuff. The other big guy, I think, for Georgia is Jamari Salyer, their starting left tackle. He came back from injury. He got nicked up prior to the SEC title game. He did a really good job against Will Anderson in that SEC title game. We'll see, in this, Will Anderson is one of the most difficult assignments in America, of course. So he has to play well. Salyer does. On the Alabama side, I think the guys to watch, it's the injury replacements, right? Like John Mechie's out. So, obviously everyone, goes up a notch or whatever. Brooks played well, Ja'Cory Brooks against Cincinnati, but, we'll see in this game. And then Alabama also has their entire right side of their offensive line is injured, the right guard and the right tackle. And then I mentioned the cornerbacks before. So, in the secondary, they're going to be very young. Kool-Aid McKinstry, one of the best names in college football. He came in and, was playing for Jobe, and Armour-Davis, they had a transfer that's been in for him and stuff like that, because he only played about half the game or less against Cincinnati. So those are the guys I think those teams need those guys to play well. Alabama cannot have its injury replacements play poorly because Alabama has so many injuries right now. And again, on the other side, Salyer needs to keep Will Anderson off of Stetson Bennett.
Yeah, Will Anderson going to be one of the best players on the field for that Alabama defense, the pass rusher, the guy off the edge that we'll be talking about all of next season. But when you go and flip sides and you go over to this Georgia defense, I think it's pretty easy to argue the most dominant unit in all of college football this past season. You can pick one guy, and it doesn't matter for draft class, but you can pick one of these guys for your future NFL team. Who is it and why?
For me, it would be Nakobe Dean, and obviously there's a lot of guys you could pick here because they have so many studs. But he just seems to be the next in line for the stud Georgia linebackers we've seen. Just one after the other. I love how fast he triggers. It's just boom. He sees it and he goes. He's extremely athletic. He doesn't play with any fear. It's all conviction when he's on the field, and he's a very physical player. Now he is a little undersized. Similar to some stud Georgia linebacker we talked about in the past. He's only 6', 225, but it hasn't seemed to be an issue. Between the tackles is the one thing I want to see from a pro evaluation. Can he blitz in there? Can he get through? Can he handle the traffic and stuff like that on between the tackle runs? But everything else, I mean, it's just fabulous. Just a fabulous player.
Yeah, he's a guy that obviously a lot of people are really, really high on moving into the postseason. One other question I've got for you, and we're going to go over to the Alabama Crimson Tide. After that SEC title game, I remember coming away from it thinking, like, Alabama's got two guys on this team that are going to be in contention to be the number one pick in 2023 on either side of the football. You got Bryce Young at quarterback, Will Anderson off the edge. So I want to ask you, when you look at these two guys, who are you taking? Or is there somebody else in this game that you would say, hey, for 2023, keep an eye on for down the road as the number one guy?
Well, obviously both these teams are going to give a lot to the 2023 draft in the same way as the 2022. But if it's but I would be picking between the two guys that you just said. And it's such a hard question because it's like asking someone, would you rather have Russell Wilson's career or would you rather have Derek Thomas? Yeah, Will Anderson has started to draw the Derek Thomas. Obviously, Derek Thomas went to Alabama. He's been getting ubiquitous comps to him, and you can see it. When was the most dominant pass rusher in college football this year. I think even more dominant than Aiden Hutchinson. And then Bryce Young, obviously, he's such a unique player. But you do see, I see some Russell Wilson in him. You see a little bit of Kyler Murray in him. He's just so twitchy, and you usually don't say that for a quarterback, but it's not just in his lower half. He has a very twitchy upper half too, and is able to whip the ball up. Yeah.
Yeah. That twitchy release, it's very, and that's the word. He gets the ball out so fast. And, we talked about him earlier in the show, just so poised, so calm, so collected. He's a lot of fun to watch. It's hard to not become smitten with him watching him, even at a young age.
It truly is. Yeah. And for the people, saying it's a lock that he's going to go number one in the 2023 draft, it's really hard to argue against that just because he's done it from such an early age. He's been so dominant. Obviously, he just won the Heisman. He's going to go into next season as the front runner to win the Heisman again, and all those different things. And with him, the one weakness or the one, sort of thing you could nitpick with his profile, it's the size thing. But because the concept has been proven by, quarterbacks like Russell Wilson or Baker Mayfield or Kyler and some of these different guys, that's no longer the question that it was, Fran, 10, 15 years ago. That it's been tossed aside. So I think he's just a tremendous prospect.
Be sure to go follow Thor on Twitter @ThorKU. You can follow all of his work over at NB Sports Edge. Thor, thanks so much for joining us once again here on the show. We will talk to you once again later in the spring as we get closer to the draft.
Thanks for having me, Fran.
Now it's time for Pick Six.
All right, we're back for another edition of Pick Sixes, my friend Ross Tucker. Ross, this is our last week, man. We had to take the week off last week because I lost my voice in the middle of last week, and that really hurt me when it comes to this competition because now I have just this game this weekend to be able to try and catch up on you. You've got a 6-point lead as we sit here today. You got a couple of wins in that first round of bowl games. So this is a big one here, Ross. We got championship weekend. First we'll hit the FCS title. Montana State, North Dakota State, Saturday afternoon, straight up pick 'em. Who do you like here in this game?
Yeah, I'll be there, by the way. I'm calling the game for Westwood 1. Really looking forward to it. Should be awesome. I'll go North Dakota State. I'm hopeful for a great game. I'm hopeful it's a toss-up, can go either way at the end. They just have a lot more experience in these situations than Montana State. Montana State hasn't been in a championship game since 1984. North Dakota State goes every year. What a crazy story. Montana State starting quarterback transferred before the playoffs. I mean, it's a wild story, and their freshman quarterback, touchdown Tommy Mellott, is fun to watch. But, I make these picks based on what I think is going to happen. I'm going North Dakota State.
Yeah, and as much as I need to go separate from you on a number of these, I can't go separate from you on this one. I have to make sure I get the W here with this one. Tough to pick against the Bison. I watched most of their win over James Madison a couple weeks ago, and it's just a really, really good team on both sides of the football. I'm going to go with North Dakota State. Let's go to the big one now. Alabama, Georgia, rematch from the SEC title a couple weeks ago. We get the big one here with the national title game next Monday night. How do you see this one going down? Straight pick 'em, Alabama and Georgia.
I'm going Georgia. I think it's time that they finally get the monkey off their back. I'm so impressed by them defensively, their depth. I mean, any guy that wears a 90 number is just awesome for them, no matter who it is. Their speed, their depth. Stetson Bennett was really sharp against Michigan. I know they've got a mental block when it comes to Alabama, but honestly, that's the only thing at this point that can really hold them back. I think they're the better team. It would just be Kirby Smart getting out coached, or Georgia once again not being able to get past the mental hurdle. I think that they're the more talented team. I think it's their time.
I'm going to go Alabama just purely because I don't want to pick against Nick Saban here. Obviously, they won in dominant fashion a couple weeks ago in the first version of this game. Obviously, I think Georgia will make a little bit of a better game of it this week, but it's tough to pick against Bryce Young and the way that he has been playing. And then also you get to that defense, and they've got guys at all three levels as well. Will Anderson, just a monster off the edge. They've got both backers are making plays sideline to sideline. They've got guys in the secondary. Jordan Battle playing so well. I will go with Alabama, even though they don't have John Mechie for Bryce Young to be able to throw the football to. Jamison Williams has proven to be more than enough. I'll go here with the Crimson Tide. Let's go now. I mentioned Bryce Young. He is going to be the subject this week of our over-under. And looking at this game, you talk about that Georgia defense, obviously tough to run against, tough to throw against. Over-under 355 passing yards for Alabama quarterback Bryce Young. He hit the over last time, but that was one of the rare times where Georgia has let up that many passing yards.
Yeah, I'm going to go over again, actually. I kind of feel like, look, if they win, I don't envision them running the ball all over Georgia. If they win, I think Bryce Young has a virtuoso performance, and I think he throws for a bunch of yards. If they lose, I think he's going to be getting a bunch of second half yards, maybe mop up time, garbage time, trying to come from behind. Either way, I'm going to take the over here.
No, then it makes a lot of sense, not only hedging the bet, but also you've made sense of it from both angles. I will take the over here, which means I need to go separate from you on these next three. Tough to imagine Bryce Young not hitting at least 355 and Alabama coming up with a W. So I will go with the over, which means I have to go separate from you on these next three here, Ross. And we're going to go with the first one, number 4. An either or. Who has more touchdown catches in this game? Georgia tight end Brock Bowers, who has been just ridiculous, freshman All-American. He was an All-SEC player at tight end, a guy we're going to be talking about for the next 3 years plus for the Georgia Bulldogs, or wide receiver Jamison Williams for Alabama. We've been talking about one of the best game breakers in college football this year. If they tie, the tie will go to Brock Bowers. So I wanted to lay that out there. It won't be a tie. There will be a winner here. Who do you like, Brock Bowers or Jamison Williams?
Well, I'm going to go Bowers because of the tie going to Bowers.
There we go.
Jamison Williams, clearly without John Mechie, Georgia can put a focus on him. He is the guy that they'll put the bullseye on and trying to be taken care of. And I'm sure in the red zone, especially, Alabama will be the same way with Brock Bowers. But I just think the tie going to Bowers was enough to put him over the top for me.
I will go Williams, and that's fine if they want to give him that extra attention in the red zone. When they're 50, 60 yards away, that's where Williams is going to do some of that damage in the intermediate area, running away from defenders in space. That is what he has done all season long. Let's go to number 5 here, our high-low. And this one, I mentioned Will Anderson earlier. Obviously, Georgia, they are loaded on defense as well. So we're going to take a look at 2 of the best defensive players in this game. Will Anderson off the edge for Alabama. Georgia linebacker Nakobe Dean, who won the Butkus Award as the best defensive player in college football. Who has more combined tackles, TFLs, and sacks in this game? This one, I think it will be pretty close, Ross, when you look at the numbers between these 2 guys. Will Anderson or Nakobe Dean?
Yep, I'm all over Nakobe Dean for this one. I think Georgia will have a good plan in place for Will Anderson, like they did for Aiden Hutchinson, the tight end chip, the running back chip. It's easier to have a plan in place for an on-the-ball player than an off-the-ball player. Got to go with Nakobe Dean.
And Anderson in the previous game had 6 tackles, 1 sack, 2 TFLs. Nakobe Dean last game, 5 tackles, no sacks, 1 TFL. Very, very close battle between those 2. And I think if you go even just game by game, those guys have been consistently productive all season long. Let's go to our last one. Now, what we've done all season, that last pick has always been our upset special. Obviously, there are no upset specials for us this week. And so for what will be our 3-point play, because the upset special is always counted as 3 for us in our scoring, who is the leading rusher in this game? You got to pick a player. And our tiebreaker, just to make sure in case we pick the same player, how many yards does that player have? I'll let you go first. I'll go second. Who is the leading rusher in this game?
Yeah, I feel pretty good about this one. Brian Robinson from Alabama. It feels like Georgia rotates Cook and White a decent amount, whereas Brian Robinson's clearly Alabama's guy. I will put him at 87 yards. I don't think he goes over 100. I think he's got a decent day. 87 yards, Brian Robinson for Alabama.
I like it. In the last one, he ran for 55 and no touchdowns. And you said 87 yards?
Yes.
87. I'm going to make sure I write that down. So Robinson, 87 yards. For me, so I wanted to let you go first. All right. I'm going to go Bryce Young, and I'm going to go 47 yards. He ran for 40 and a touchdown the last time these two teams played. He's made some big plays with his legs. This Georgia defense is just so good on the ground. I think they'll really work to keep Robinson in that traditional run game locked down. But Bryce Young has got that ability to break off a long one. He had a couple nice ones here in the last time these two teams met. So I'm going to go Bryce Young, 47 yards. We'll see. We'll see if that's enough. I'm going to need this. If I'm going to win, I'm going to need the Bryce Young one to hit here, Ross. But it's been fun. That was the one thing that sucked about canceling last week's episode was I knew it would be very, very difficult for me to catch you. But we'll see if I can make it happen.
Yeah, we shall see. I hope it doesn't. I don't think it will. I think I will take home the title this year. Were you
upset by the rematch, the idea of this rematch after we just saw these two teams face a couple weeks ago?
No, I'm not. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
No, I wanted Cincinnati and Michigan to play better.
Sure.
And I think it would have been awesome if either one of them won. But no, I'm glad Georgia has this opportunity again. Man, it will be so bad if they lose again. So bad.
Yeah. And look, what do we say in the NFL all the time, right? It's tough to beat a team twice in 1 year. It's tough to beat a team twice in a month. And that's what Alabama will have to do against a very good Georgia team. I'm really psyched for this one, man. We'll talk all about it next week right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by Life Brand.
On the clock.
Well, excited to be joined this week on Scouting Report by the Director of Football Operations and Player Personnel at the Shrine Bowl, one Eric Galko. Eric, thanks so much for joining us here once again on the show.
Appreciate it, Fran. We're in January now. It's pretty much draft season now, huh?
It's pretty much draft season. Obviously, a large majority of NFL fans eyes forward towards April's draft. And we could say it's this year's draft now, now that the calendar has officially turned. And I want to talk to you about one of the more intriguing senior pass rushers in this year's draft, Eric, and that's Jeffrey Gunter from Coastal Carolina. When did he first pop on your radar? He's got a little bit of an interesting backstory.
Yeah, he wasn't a top recruit, but he really emerged, I think, as a freshman or a sophomore at Coastal Carolina in 2018. He was first team all Sun Belt. He was like a rising group of 5 player, like, hey, keep your eye out for the future. And then he ended up transferring to NC State to go to a bigger program. Sat out this year in 2019, but actually transferred back to Coastal. So we kind of went to NC State for a year, but didn't play on the field because of the transfer rules. And then came back because of family issues back to Coastal Carolina, and then kind of reemerged in 2020 and 2021. So a player that's been on the radars for a while now. And he's a player he's a pass rusher with plus athletic ability, with plus production. I'm surprised he's not more talked about in the kind of the draft process so far, because I think he's one of the better pass rushers in this draft class.
He was really fun to study, and a guy that has the ability to win in a number of different ways. The Eagles dipped into that Chanticleer bag last year with Teron Jackson, making him a pick late on the third day of the draft. And I feel like Gunter is in that same kind of mold, 6'4", 275 pounds. Interested to kind of get your thoughts on him, just the overall total scouting report with what Gunter brings to the table.
Yeah, he's a well-built edge rusher, ideal measurables, maybe a bit smaller, the hand size and arm length, but overall fits the prototype you want for an edge player in the NFL and has enough weight and enough lower body frame to play at DN if you want him to, or could be a stand-up player, and did that obviously at Coastal this past year. But He's an above average athlete, B plus to A athlete. I think he'll test very well at the NFL Combine. He plays with incredible effort and motor on the perimeter, working in the backfield. Yeah. He's got developed speed rush moves to work on the perimeter as well as counter back inside. But I think the exciting part for him is that he's added things to his game between 2018, 2020, and 2021. And I watch a pass rusher, again, with athleticism, right? Really impressive athlete. He's been productive. And he went from just being a speed guy in 2018 to being a speed long arm guy in 2020 to adding some more counter moves in 2021. He's a guy that's gotten better every single year. And thankfully, because he's coming to the Shrine Bowl, I've had a chance to talk to Jeffrey, and he is a incredibly smart, thoughtful, focused individual as well. One of the better players in terms of speak with him, in terms of knowing the process that I've spoken with this draft process. I think his ceiling is going to be even higher. I don't want to say he rises in the draft process, but for a guy that I think a lot of NFL teams feel is on the cusp of being a top 100 prospect now, I think the draft process is only going to highlight his ability to get better over the course of 3 or 4 months between now and April, as well as impress at an all-star game, at the NFL Combine, and in NFL interviews.
I'm glad you brought up just that play personality, because that was the thing that most stood out to me while watching Jeffrey was that relentless pursuit of the football. This is a really tough physical player. He's really good on contact, playing through contact. So at 6'4", 273, I'm interested to see the total frame and what the body type is up close, but he's just a fun player to study.
I think the really intriguing part, and again, a simple scouting thing is if the kid is athletic, if the kid is productive, if he has a high motor, and he's a smart person, like you just take that guy, right?
Yep.
You don't overthink draft rate sometimes. And there's some guys, nose tackles who are 350 who play with motor, like just check the box, take that guy. I think Gunter is a guy as an edge rusher that hey, he has those 4 things you want in a professional football player. And I think that's why the ceiling is great there. But again, I think his ceiling, his best play is still ahead of him in the NFL for sure. I think he's still young and has a lot of room to get better.
And isn't that funny? And not just at this position with this player, but just when you look at this process, and it's even if you don't even just watch the film, but you're being given the traits and what the qualities of a player, and say, all right, well, we're checking a lot of boxes here. This guy just seems like a safe bet. And while going through the profile of Gunter, it's I want to buy stock on this kid.
Yeah, I mean, scouting sometimes is really intricate, and sometimes it's really easy.
Right.
And talking to veteran scouts or executives who've been around for a long time, you can just sum up what's going to make a guy work or not work in 2 or 3 sentences most of the time. And I think Jeffrey, it's hey, plus athlete, productive, high character, high motor, that kid's going to make it in the NFL. Boom, that's a Jeffrey Gunter scouting report. And I think he has a great chance to be a top 100 pick, but also one of the better rookie or second-year pass rushers from this entire draft class with the way he's developing over his career.
Well, be sure to follow Eric on Twitter at Eric Galko. The Shrine Bowl, just a few weeks away, man. I know you got to be excited, and I really appreciate you taking the time in a very busy part of the calendar for you. We will talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Fran.
Well, great stuff this week from Eric Galko, Ross Tucker, Thor Nystrom, and of course, the one and only Ben Fennell. We'll be back later next week. Actually, probably Tuesday, you can expect the episode, maybe Wednesday morning, as we watch the national title game on Monday night. We'll share all of our thoughts. Myself, Ben Fennell, Dane Brugler will share our thoughts here next week on the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by Life Brand. When the clock hits all zeros, the game might be over, but the action is not. Join us for the post-game show presented by Rico for instant reaction. Watch live as Coach Nick Sirianni and Eagles players come to the podium and meet with the media. We will make sure you do not miss a word. Myself, Ike Reese, and Gabriella DiGiovanni will also break down the game live at the desk and hear from Eagles insider Dave Spadaro to get his thoughts. The post-game show presented by Rico can be seen on PhiladelphiaEagles.com, the Eagles mobile app, and the team's social media channels.